The crystal chandelier overhead seemed to mock Adeline with its brilliance, each facet reflecting the 1,000-watt smile of the woman on her husband's arm. That woman wasn't her. In the center of the most exclusive gala of the year, Bennett, her husband of 10 years, was parading his mistress, a starlet draped in diamonds that Adeline knew she had inadvertently paid for. The whispers were like wasps, stinging the air around her. They thought she was a ghost, a relic of a past he was publicly shedding. But they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that by the end of the night, the spotlight they all coveted would find its rightful owner. The invitation had arrived a month ago, resting on the marble island of their cavernous kitchen, like a royal decree. It was thick, cream-colored cardstock, the embossed gold lettering of the Pinnacle Foundation Gala, shimmering under the recessed lighting. It was the social event of the season, a confluence of old money and new power, where billion-dollar deals were sketched on cocktail napkins and reputations were made or shattered between courses. For Bennett Ashford, CEO of Vanguard Properties, attendance wasn't just recommended. It was required. It was his stage. Adeline traced the sharp edges of the envelope. For 10 years she had been the silent partner in their ascent. While Bennett was the charismatic face of Vanguard, Adeline was the soul. She was the architect whose quiet genius had redefined city skylines, the one who translated cold concrete and steel into living, breathing art. Her designs were the reason Vanguard wasn't just another development firm. It was a legacy. But Bennett had a knack for absorbing her light and reflecting it as his own. "We are a team," he'd say at press conferences, his arm securely around her waist, but his eyes were always on the cameras. Over time, the "we" had become a thinly veiled I. "You'll need a new dress, of course," Bennett had said, not looking up from his tablet as he breezed through the kitchen. His tone was casual, but it carried the weight of an order. "Something stunning. We're at the head table this year. All eyes will be on us." Adeline had simply nodded. The distance between them had grown from a crack to a chasm over the past year. It started with late nights at the office, then unexplained weekend trips. He'd become a stranger who slept in her bed. His phone always face down on the nightstand, buzzing with texts he dismissed as work. A new scent clung to his suits, a cloying, sweet perfume that was nothing like her own subtle fragrance. A week before the gala, she found the first piece of concrete evidence. A receipt tucked into the pocket of a dry-cleaned jacket. It was from a boutique so exclusive it didn't have a sign, only a discreet, polished brass number on the door. The charge was astronomical for a custom-made gown, by a designer known for his audacious body-hugging creations. It was not her style. Below the dress was another item, a diamond necklace, a piece so extravagant it was clearly meant for a grand debut. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She knew with chilling certainty that the dress and the necklace were not for her. The name on the customer profile was not Adeline Ashford. It was Katerina Lowe. Adeline's fingers flew across her keyboard, a quick search bringing up the face that would haunt her dreams. Katerina Lowe was an Instagram model turned aspiring actress, known more for her red carpet appearances with wealthy benefactors than any actual film roles. Her online persona was a curated fantasy of private jets, champagne, and couture. In every photo she had a predatory gleam in her eyes, a hunger for the spotlight. The night before the gala, the final brutal confirmation came. Adeline was in her home studio, trying to lose herself in the blueprints for a new pediatric hospital wing she was designing pro bono, when she heard Bennett in the hallway. He was on the phone, his voice a low, intimate murmur. "Everything's set for tomorrow, kitten," he said, and Adeline's blood ran cold. He had never had a pet name for her. "Yes, wear the necklace. I want everyone to see you. It's time they understood who the future of Vanguard Properties really is." A pause. Adeline held her breath, pressing her ear closer to the door. "Adeline, no, she's not coming. Said she had a headache." He lied with practiced ease. "It's better this way. A clean break. Tomorrow night, the world meets you. Our world." The click of the door to their bedroom shutting sealed her fate. The world didn't just spin, it shattered. The blueprints blurred through a sudden storm of tears. He wasn't just having an affair. He was replacing her. He was planning to publicly execute their marriage at the very event that was supposed to celebrate their shared success. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight on her chest that made it impossible to breathe. She collapsed into her chair, the silent scream trapped in her throat. He was going to erase her, and he was going to do it in front of everyone. For an hour, she let the grief wash over her, a tidal wave of betrayal and sorrow. But then, as the tears subsided, something else began to surface. It was a slow, burning ember deep within her. It was the anger of a creator whose work had been stolen. It was the fury of a woman who had been rendered invisible. He thought she had a headache. He thought she would crumble. He had forgotten who she was. He had forgotten that she was the architect. She didn't just design buildings. She designed foundations. And she knew, with a sudden, terrifying clarity, that she could design his ruin just as easily as she had designed his success. The ember of anger glowed brighter, and a plan began to form, a blueprint for a different kind of structure revenge. The initial shock gave way to a cold, crystalline rage. Adeline sat in the dark of her studio, the glow of the monitor illuminating the stark lines of her face. Bennett's words echoed in her mind. It's time they understood who the future of Vanguard Properties really is. He had made a fatal miscalculation. He saw her as a part of the past, a foundation to be paved over. He had forgotten that a foundation, if compromised, could bring the entire structure crashing down. She pulled up the guest list for the Pinnacle Foundation Gala. It was a who's who of finance, technology, and real estate. Every major investor in Vanguard Properties would be there. The board members would be there. The media would be there, hungry for any hint of scandal. Bennett had chosen his stage perfectly, but he'd mistakenly cast himself as the star, not the sacrifice. Her first call was made at 3 a.m. The number belonged to a man she hadn't spoken to in years, but who had never left her mind, Leonard Whitaker. Whitaker was a titan of the architectural world, a living legend who had retired from the day-to-day grind, but still held immense influence. He had been her professor at university, the one who saw the raw, untamed genius in her work and pushed her relentlessly. He had always been disappointed when she'd submerged her career into Bennett's becoming the anonymous force behind the Ashford brand. He answered on the second ring, his voice raspy with sleep, but instantly alert. "Adeline, is everything all right?" "Leonard?" she said, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "I need your help. I'm calling in the favor you said I always had." She explained everything, the affair. Bennett's plan to replace her, the public humiliation he had orchestrated for the gala. She didn't cry or waver. She laid out the facts like she was presenting a structural analysis, cold, precise, and damning. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then Whitaker let out a low chuckle devoid of humor. "That arrogant fool," he muttered. "He always did think he built the cathedral just because he laid the final brick. I knew this day would come." "What do you need, my dear?" "I need a partner," Adeline said. "And I need a platform." She spent the next hour laying out her plan. It was audacious, risky, and would require perfect timing. It hinged on a secret she had been holding for 6 months, a project she had been developing in her spare time. A passion project that was poised to revolutionize sustainable urban development. It was a concept so innovative, so potentially lucrative, that she had been waiting for the right moment to present it to the Vanguard board. She had naively thought she and Bennett would present it together. Now, it would be her declaration of independence. The Horizon Project, she called it. A self-sustaining city block, a marvel of green architecture that combined residential, commercial, and agricultural spaces in a symbiotic loop. It was brilliant, and she had the schematics, the financial projections, and the environmental impact reports to prove it. Whitaker was silent as she spoke, and for a moment she feared she had overplayed her hand. But when he finally responded, his voice was electric with excitement. "Adeline, this is more than brilliant. It's visionary. Bennett never would have understood it. His vision is limited to the bottom line of the next quarter. This is a legacy." He continued, "Forget Vanguard. Vanguard is Bennett. You are so much more. We'll establish a new entity. I'll make the calls. I'll bring the capital. We'll announce our partnership. But where? At the gala," Adeline said, a smile finally touching her lips. "Bennett wants a show. We'll give him one." The plan was set in motion with ruthless efficiency. Whitaker, with his unimpeachable reputation, began making discreet calls to a handful of the most powerful investors who would be at the gala. He didn't reveal the details, only that he was backing a new venture with a once-in-a-generation talent, and that a preliminary announcement would be made that night. The bait was laid. Meanwhile, Adeline focused on her own preparations. She wasn't just going to the gala. She was making an entrance. She booked an appointment with the one designer Bennett had always deemed too avant-garde for the Vanguard brand. She didn't want a dress. She wanted armor. She chose a gown of midnight blue silk that shimmered like a galaxy. It was elegant, but severe, with a sharp architectural neckline and a cape that flowed from her shoulders like liquid smoke. It was the dress of a queen, not a victim. The day of the gala arrived. Adeline moved through her house like a phantom. Bennett had left early, humming to himself as he chose a bespoke tuxedo. "Sure you don't want to come?" he'd asked, the feigned concern a final twisting knife. "It's going to be quite a night." "I'm sure," she'd replied, her voice neutral. "Have a good time." He kissed her on the cheek, a cold, perfunctory gesture. The scent of Katerina's perfume was already on his collar. As soon as his car pulled away, Adeline's team arrived. A celebrity hairstylist, a makeup artist who worked with movie stars. They were part of the package Whitaker had arranged. As they worked, transforming her, Adeline looked at the woman in the mirror. The sorrow was still there, deep in her eyes, but it was now overlaid with something harder, something forged in the fire of betrayal. She was no longer just Adeline Ashford, the quiet, supportive wife. She was Adeline Hale, her maiden name, the architect of her own destiny. Tonight, she wouldn't just be taking back her life. She would be unveiling her masterpiece. The hours leading up to the gala were a masterclass in controlled chaos. While Bennett was likely sipping champagne with Katerina, basking in the pre-glow of their social launch, Adeline was orchestrating a corporate coup from her living room. Her phone was a constant buzz of encrypted messages and calls. Leonard Whitaker had moved with the speed and precision of a military general. By midday, he had secured verbal commitments from 3 major investors known for their foresight and their impatience with corporate stagnation. One was a tech billionaire who had made his fortune in renewable energy. Another, a private equity magnate with a portfolio heavily weighted in sustainable infrastructure. The third was a woman who ran the largest architectural endowment in the country. Whitaker had simply whispered 2 words to them, Adeline Hale, and the Horizon Project. It was enough. They were intrigued, their appetites whetted for the secret announcement. Adeline, meanwhile, finalized the legal framework. A team of lawyers Whitaker had on retainer had drafted the incorporation documents for Hale Whitaker Innovations. Her intellectual property, including every last blueprint and projection for the Horizon Project, was transferred into the new entity legally shielded from Bennett and Vanguard properties. It was a clean surgical cut. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawns of their estate, her transformation team arrived. The makeup artist, a man named Antoine, regarded her with a critical eye. "Mr. Whitaker said you were to be reborn tonight," he said, his French accent clipping the words. "And a phoenix requires the right kind of fire." He worked with an artist's focus, sculpting her face with light and shadow. He emphasized her high cheekbones and the fierce intelligence in her dark eyes. There were no soft pinks or demure shades. He chose a bold crimson lip and a smoky, dramatic eye. "This is not the face of a wife," he declared, holding up a mirror. "This is the face of a CEO." The woman staring back at her was a stranger, yet more herself than she had been in years. The veil of complacency was gone, replaced by a shield of sheer determination. Then came the dress. When she slipped into the midnight silk, it felt less like fabric and more like a second skin. The architectural cut of the neckline framed her face, powerful and uncompromising. The cape was the masterstroke. At rest, it hung behind her with quiet elegance. But with the slightest movement, it billowed out a wave of dark energy that commanded attention. She added no jewelry, save for a pair of diamond earrings that were a gift from her late father, simple, brilliant, and entirely her own. They were a stark contrast to the gaudy, purchased newness of the necklace Katerina would be wearing. Her car, a sleek black town car, completely different from the garish sports car Bennett favored, arrived at precisely 8:30 p.m. Her driver, a discreet professional, also arranged by Whitaker, simply nodded at her. "To the battle, Miss Hale," he said, with a ghost of a smile. "Indeed," she replied, her voice calm. During the drive, she didn't allow herself to feel nervousness or fear. She reviewed the key points of her presentation on a tablet, the data and figures a comforting balm of logic against the emotional storm that brewed beneath the surface. She was not just confronting her husband. She was launching a multi-billion-dollar enterprise. The personal stakes were immense, but the professional stakes were what grounded her. Bennett had tried to destroy her emotionally. She would respond on the battlefield. She knew best business. She had timed her arrival for 9:15 p.m., well after the cocktail hour had begun. She knew Bennett and Katerina would have arrived early, wanting to maximize their time in the spotlight. They would be comfortable by now, surrounded by sycophants, believing the night was theirs. They would be unprepared. As the car pulled up to the grand entrance of the museum, where the gala was being held, Adeline took one last deep breath. The doors were flanked by photographers, their flashes popping like miniature starbursts. She could hear the murmur of the crowd inside, the clinking of glasses, the swell of the orchestra. It was the lion's den. For a fleeting second, the image of Bennet's smug face and Katerina's triumphant smile flashed in her mind, and a pang of the old hurt echoed in her chest. Then she caught her reflection in the darkened window of the car. She saw the woman with the crimson lips and the fire in her eyes. She saw the architect who had built empires. She was not the woman who cried in her studio less than 24 hours ago. She was a force of nature about to make landfall. The driver opened her door. "Showtime," he said softly. Adeline stepped out of the car. The cape swirled around her ankles as a cool night breeze caught it. The flashbulbs turned on her a sudden blinding onslaught, and with her head held high, Adeline Hale walked into the storm. The grand hall of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was a breathtaking spectacle of power and wealth. The Pinnacle Foundation Gala had transformed the space into an ethereal forest of white orchids and shimmering fairy lights. A string orchestra played softly from a balcony, their music a delicate counterpoint to the low roar of 100 conversations. Bennet Ashford was in his element. He stood near the centerpiece ice sculpture, a towering, intricate model of the Vanguard Tower, with Katerina Lowe clinging to his arm. He was the sun, and she was the dazzling planet caught in his orbit. Katerina was wearing the dress from the receipt, a creation of crimson silk and sequins that left little to the imagination. Around her neck was the diamond necklace, a vulgar spray of carats that screamed new money. They were a spectacle, and they knew it. Bennet radiated a smug satisfaction, accepting congratulations for a recent acquisition with a magnanimous tilt of his head. Katerina, meanwhile, played her part to perfection, laughing a little too loudly, touching Bennet's arm with a possessive air, and meeting the curious stares of the other guests with a defiant smirk. "Bennet, darling, you've outdone yourself this year," purred a society matron whose husband sat on the Vanguard board. Her eyes flickered to Katerina, a silent question hanging in the air. "I believe in investing in assets with high growth potential," Bennet replied, squeezing Katerina's hand. The double meaning was deliberate, and Katerina preened under the attention. The message was clear. Adeline was the old, stable stock, and Katerina was the exciting, high-risk, high-reward venture. The whispers followed them as they moved through the room. "Is that Katerina Lowe? Where is Adeline? How scandalous, and at the Pinnacle Gala of all places." Bennet heard the whispers, and he savoured them. It was exactly the shockwave he had wanted to create. He was shedding his old life, and he was doing it on the biggest stage imaginable. He felt invincible, the master of his universe. He spotted several of his key investors across the room and steered Katerina in their direction. He wanted them to see his new partner, this vibrant, youthful symbol of his future. He wanted to solidify his image as a man of action, unafraid to make bold, decisive moves in both his personal and professional life. As he approached a small group, including the tech billionaire Tristan Cole, he noticed a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. It started at the entrance, a ripple of silence that began to spread outward, quelling the chatter. Heads began to turn one by one, like dominoes falling in slow motion. The orchestra seemed to falter for a moment. Bennet frowned, annoyed at the interruption. He followed the gaze of the crowd, and then he saw her. For a moment his brain couldn't process the image. It was Adeline, but it was not. The woman standing in the grand archway was a regal, formidable presence. The midnight blue gown seemed to drink the light, and the cape billowed gently behind her, as if stirred by her own personal storm. Her hair, usually in a soft, elegant chignon, was styled in a sleek, powerful sweep off her face. Her makeup was dramatic, her expression serene but unyielding. She paused at the entrance, her eyes sweeping across the room, not with the panicked search of a scorned wife, but with the cool assessment of a monarch surveying her court. The flashbulbs from the press line outside still popped behind her, backlighting her, creating an almost celestial aura. A wave of stunned silence rolled through the hall. Everyone had been expecting a scene, a tearful confrontation, a quiet, humiliated exit. No one had expected this. This was not a victim. This was a revelation. Bennett's blood ran cold. His smug smile froze and then melted from his face. He felt Katerina's grip tighten on his arm, her manicured nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she doing here?" She hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. "You said she wasn't coming." Bennett couldn't answer. He was paralyzed by a mixture of shock and a sudden, unwelcome spike of fear. This was not the timid, agreeable woman he had left at home. This was someone else entirely. The power dynamic he had so carefully constructed had just been obliterated by a single, silent entrance. Adeline began to walk her steps unhurried and deliberate. She didn't look at him. She didn't even glance in his direction. Instead, her gaze connected with Leonard Whittaker, who was standing with the gala's host. Whittaker gave her a nearly imperceptible nod. As she moved, people parted for her, as if by instinct. The whispers started again, but their tone had changed. The pity was gone, replaced by awe and confusion. "My God, is that Adeline Ashford? I've never seen her look like that. What is going on?" Bennett felt the spotlight he so cherished swing away from him, leaving him and Katerina in a sudden cold shadow. All eyes were on his wife. The night that was supposed to be his coronation was rapidly turning into something else. And for the first time that evening, Bennett Ashford felt a profound sense of dread. The architect had arrived, and he had a terrifying feeling she was about to condemn the building. Adeline moved through the opulent hall with a grace that was both unnerving and captivating. She was a panther, gliding through a garden of peacocks. Every eye was on her, but her focus was singular. She ignored the gawking faces and the frantic whispers, her path taking her not toward her husband, but toward the very heart of the power structure in the room. Her first stop was the gala's host, a revered philanthropist named Robert Chen. As she approached, he and Leonard Whittaker turned to greet her. "Adeline, my dear," Chen said, his voice booming with genuine warmth as he took both her hands. "You look absolutely breathtaking, a true vision." "Robert, thank you for having me," Adeline replied, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily in the now hushed room. From across the floor, Bennett watched, his jaw clenched. Chen was an old-money gatekeeper. His public approval meant everything. For him to greet Adeline with such open admiration while Bennett stood with his mistress was a subtle but significant shift in the evening's power dynamics. "I believe you were just telling me about a surprise announcement, Leonard," Chen said, turning to Whittaker, but keeping his eyes on Adeline. "Indeed," Whittaker said, his eyes twinkling. "Patience, Robert. The best things are worth the wait." The trio's easy camaraderie was a public spectacle. It was a clear signal to everyone watching. Adeline was not an outcast. She was an honored guest, flanked by two of the most respected men in the room. Katerina was practically vibrating with rage beside Bennett. "Do something," she seethed, her carefully constructed smile now a tight, angry line. "She's making a fool of us. Go over there and get rid of her." Spurred into action, Bennett strode across the floor, his face a mask of cold fury. He was determined to regain control of the narrative. He cut through the crowd, reaching Adeline's side and placing a proprietary hand on her arm. "Adeline," he said, his voice low and menacing. "What is the meaning of this? I thought you were ill." Adeline didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head to look at him, her gaze so glacial it seemed to physically push him back. She then looked down at his hand on her arm with theatrical disdain. "Remove your hand, Bennett," she said calmly. Her voice wasn't loud, but in the focused silence around them it was as clear as a gunshot. Bennett, shocked by her audacity, snatched his hand back as if he'd been burned. "I decided I was feeling better," she continued, turning back to Chen and Whittaker, as if Bennett were nothing more than a minor interruption. "In fact, I've never felt better." The public dismissal was a slap in the face more potent than any physical blow. Humiliation washed over Bennett in a hot wave. He was left standing there, spurned and ignored, as his wife continued her conversation with the host. Katerina, who had followed a few steps behind, looked on in disbelief, her face pale beneath her heavy makeup. Adeline then began to circulate, but not aimlessly. Her movements were precise. She was greeted warmly by Tristan Cole, the tech billionaire. "Adeline," he said, shaking her hand firmly. "Whittaker told me you were working on something special. I'm all ears." She spoke with the head of the architectural endowment, who looked at her with newfound respect. Each conversation was brief, but the message was potent. She was not here as Bennett Ashford's wife. She was here as a professional, a peer connecting with the most influential people in attendance. The tide had turned completely. The room was now divided into two invisible camps. On one side stood Bennett and Katerina, suddenly looking cheap and desperate, their little drama now seeming tawdry and pathetic. On the other was Adeline, a figure of mystery and power, holding court with the titans of industry. The narrative was no longer about a husband leaving his wife. It was about something far bigger, and no one knew what it was. Bennett, desperate to reclaim the spotlight, tried to laugh it off, making a show of getting champagne for Katerina and whispering in her ear. But the act was transparent. The confidence had evaporated from his posture. He kept shooting panicked glances toward Adeline, his mind racing. What was she doing? What was Whittaker's role in this? The orchestra finished a piece, and in the momentary silence, Robert Chen walked toward the stage at the front of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice amplified by the microphone, "if I could have your attention, please. We have a special unscheduled announcement tonight. A new venture that I believe will reshape the future of our city." A nervous energy filled the room. Bennett felt a knot of pure dread tighten in his stomach. He looked at Katerina, whose face was a mixture of confusion and fear. This was not their announcement. This was not part of the plan. "Please welcome to the stage," Chen continued, "a man who needs no introduction, my dear friend, Mr. Leonard Whittaker." A smattering of applause broke out as Whittaker ascended the few steps to the podium. He stood for a moment, his gaze sweeping the room, before landing for a brief, pointed second on Bennett. Then he smiled. "Thank you, Robert," Whittaker began. "Tonight we are here to celebrate vision, to celebrate the future. For too long, our industry has been dominated by the old ways of thinking, valuing profit over people, concrete over conscience. But that era is coming to an end." Bennett felt the blood drain from his face. Every word was a veiled shot, a missile aimed directly at him and Vanguard Properties. "I am here tonight," Whitaker's voice boomed to announce that I am coming out of retirement for one final transformative project. I am putting my name, my reputation, and my capital behind a new company and a new leader. A leader whose genius has been the ghost in the machine for far too long. A leader who is about to step into the light and claim her legacy. He paused, letting the suspense hang in the air like a thick fog. It is my profound honor to introduce my partner, the visionary architect and CEO of the newly formed Hale Whitaker Innovations, Ms. Adeline Hale. The name Adeline Hale echoed through the grand hall, amplified by the sound system, and landed with the force of a physical blow. A profound collective silence fell over the room, a vacuum of sound where 100 conversations had just been buzzing. For a disbelieving second, no one moved. Then the name was repeated in a cascade of frantic whispers rippling outwards from the stage. Hale. Not Ashford. Bennett felt as if the world had tilted on its axis, sending him into a nauseating, uncontrollable spin. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, became a thick fog of denial. Hale. He hadn't heard that name in a decade. It was the name of the quiet, brilliant student he had met in a university library. The name on their marriage certificate, a relic of a past he had systematically absorbed into his own brand. It was a name that should have been extinct, but here it was being spoken from the most important stage by one of the most powerful men in their industry. Katerina's perfectly manicured nails dug into his bicep, her confusion quickly curdling into panic. "What is he talking about?" she demanded, her voice, a shrill, sharp thing in the charged atmosphere. "Who is Adeline Hale? Is this some kind of joke?" But Bennett couldn't form a reply. He was trapped in a nightmare, his eyes locked on the stage as Adeline moved from her seat. She rose with a liquid grace that seemed to command the very air around her. She wasn't rushing, nor was she hesitant. Her walk to the stage was a procession, a slow, deliberate claiming of a throne that had always been rightfully hers. The spotlight followed her, catching the celestial shimmer of her midnight blue gown and the regal flow of her cape. She was not the wife he had left at home. She was not even the stunning woman who had made a grand entrance an hour ago. This was someone new, a queen ascending to power, and the entire room seemed to be her royal court, holding its breath in collective awe. She reached the podium and stood beside a beaming Leonard Whitaker. She adjusted the microphone, the small sound echoing in the silent hall, and then she lifted her gaze to the audience. Her eyes, calm and luminous under the bright lights, swept across the hundreds of captivated faces. For a fleeting, heart-stopping moment, her gaze passed over Bennett. It was not a glance filled with hatred or triumph or even anger. It was something far more devastating, a look of complete and utter irrelevance. It was the glance a person might give a piece of furniture, a shadow in a corner, a non-entity. In that single chilling moment, Bennett Ashford felt himself cease to exist in her world. "Thank you, Leonard," she began, and her voice, so often soft and tentative in his presence, was now a new instrument entirely. It was rich, clear, and resonated with an unshakable authority that silenced the last of the whispers. "And thank you all. For 10 years I have been proud to contribute to the architectural landscape of this city. I have always believed that buildings are more than just structures of steel and glass. They are the homes for our lives, the incubators for our dreams, and the most tangible legacy we leave for the generations that follow." Her words were elegant, a subtle but unmistakable critique of the profit-first, soulless skyscrapers that had become the signature of vanguard properties under his leadership. But a legacy built on repetition is stagnation, she continued, her voice gaining strength. A future built on the blueprints of the past is not a future at all. It is a memory. Tonight I am thrilled to announce a new chapter, a new philosophy. Hale Whitaker. Innovations is founded on a single radical idea that progress and humanity, profit and sustainability are not mutually exclusive concepts. We are launching a project that will not just add to our skyline, but will fundamentally redefine it. We call it the Horizon Project. As she spoke the name, the massive screen behind her, which had been displaying the Pinnacle Foundation's logo, flickered to life. A breathtaking 3D rendering filled the space, and a collective gasp swept through the audience. It was a vision of a city block unlike anything they had ever seen. Towers of elegant, sweeping lines were draped in cascading vertical gardens. Transparent sky bridges, latticed with solar panels that resembled stained glass, connected the buildings. Rooftops were not empty voids, but lush parks and thriving agricultural spaces. It was a perfect symbiotic fusion of nature and cutting-edge technology. It was beautiful, visionary, and unmistakably brilliant. It was the design Bennett had glanced at for 30 seconds and called a pipe dream. The Horizon Project. Adeline's voice, narrated perfectly timed with the stunning visuals, is a self-sustaining, zero-carbon footprint community. It will generate its own power through integrated photovoltaics and geothermal exchange. It will capture and recycle 100% of its water. It will produce a significant portion of its own food through vertical hydroponic farms. It is not just a development. It is a living, breathing ecosystem. It is our blueprint for the future of urban living. The room was electric. The investors Whitaker had primed were leaning forward, their faces alight with the thrill of discovery. Tristan Cole, the tech billionaire, had a wide, hungry grin on his face. Bennett could feel the tectonic plates of power shifting beneath his feet. He could see his board members staring at the screen, their expressions transforming from shock to awe, and then to a cold, hard reassessment of their allegiance to him. Then Adeline prepared to deliver the final fatal blow. Her voice remained calm, but it took on the sharp, precise edge of a surgeon's scalpel. A vision, of course, is only a dream without the resources and the location to make it a reality, she said, letting the statement hang in the air. Bennett felt a tiny, insane flicker of hope. It's just a concept, he thought. A fantasy to embarrass me. Which is why, Adeline continued, I am so deeply grateful to the incredible foresight of our initial investment partners, including Mr. Tristan Cole and the Atherton Endowment, who have joined Mr. Whitaker and myself in our cause. She nodded graciously to her new allies, who nodded back, sealing their public pact. With their support, I am pleased to announce that Hale Whitaker Innovations has already secured full and exclusive funding for the first phase of development. The flicker of hope in Bennett's chest died. Furthermore, she said, her eyes finding his in the crowd for one final pointed moment, we have acquired the exclusive development rights to the North Shore parcel. If the name Hale had been a shockwave, this was a nuclear detonation. The North Shore parcel, the single most valuable and sought-after piece of land in the city. The project that was supposed to be Vanguard's magnum opus, his own legacy. He had poured millions into lobbying, planning, and securing back-channel agreements for that land. The blood drained from his face and the roar in his ears drowned out all other sound. He had been gutted, disemboweled in a room full of his peers, his investors and his enemies. He had been so focused on the personal humiliation, he hadn't seen the professional annihilation coming. She hadn't just planned to leave him. She had planned to bankrupt him, to dismantle his empire brick by brick. And she had just pulled out the cornerstone. "We are breaking ground next month," Adeline concluded, her voice ringing with unwavering conviction. "The future is not something we wait for. It is something we build." For a beat, there was silence. Then the room exploded. It wasn't just applause. It was a standing ovation, a roar of approval and excitement for her vision and her victory. Leonard Whittaker embraced Adeline on stage, a proud mentor, celebrating his greatest student. Bennett stood frozen amidst the chaos invisible. Katerina was staring at him, her face a mask of horrified comprehension. The diamonds around her neck suddenly looked like cheap glass. She had attached herself to a man who had just been rendered obsolete. The spotlight she craved had indeed found its owner, and it was burning Bennett Ashford to ashes. The applause that washed over the grand hall was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that seemed to slam Bennett Ashford against the marble floors. It was not for him. This roaring, thunderous validation was for Adeline. And for him, it was the sound of his world being torn apart, piece by excruciating piece. He stood frozen a statue in a bespoke suit as the warmth and light of the room seemed to recede, leaving him in a pocket of profound cold. Every clap was a hammer blow against the fragile facade of his life. Katerina was the first to react, her survival instincts razor-sharp. Her perfectly manicured fingers, which had been digging into his arm like talons, suddenly released their grip. Her eyes, wide with a predator's assessment of a failed hunt, darted from Adeline on the stage to the powerful figures in the crowd, now looking at her with undisguised contempt. She had backed the wrong horse, and the stench of his failure was beginning to cling to her. "You idiot!" she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper, meant only for him. Her practiced smile was gone, replaced by a snarl of pure disgust. "You told me she was nothing. You're a bad bet, Bennett. The worst I ever made." Without another glance, she detached herself from his side. With the fluid grace of a creature escaping a trap, she smoothed down her crimson dress, lifted her chin, and slinked into the throng of guests, disappearing like a wisp of smoke. She was just another casualty of his catastrophic miscalculation, another asset he could no longer afford. He watched her go, a bitter acknowledgement rising in his throat. She wasn't leaving him. She was simply moving toward the new center of gravity, in the room his wife. As Adeline descended the stage, flanked by an exultant Leonard Whittaker, she was immediately enveloped by a coterie of the city's most influential people. It was a magnetic pull, a realignment of the solar system around a new sun. Bennett watched paralyzed, as men he considered his allies, his board members, the very pillars of his professional life, bypassed him without a flicker of recognition. One of them, a man named Jeffrey, who he'd golfed with just last week, had to physically shoulder past him to get to Adeline. Jeffrey caught his eye for a split second, and in that glance, Bennett saw it all: pity, disdain, and the cold, hard dismissal of a man cutting his losses. A primal rage born of sheer terror finally broke through his paralysis. He had to do something. He couldn't let her obliterate him without a fight. He began to push through the crowd, his movements clumsy, earning him annoyed glares. He was a ghost at the feast, an unwelcome reminder of a fallen regime. Finally, he broke through the circle of admirers and stood before her. "Adeline," he said, his voice a low, desperate growl. "A word. Now." The chatter around them died down. Adeline turned slowly, her expression placid, as if addressing a stranger who had lost his way. "I don't think we have anything left to discuss. she said, her voice carrying in the sudden quiet. "You can't do this," he hissed, grabbing her arm, his fingers digging into the fine silk. "Those designs, the Horizon Project. You developed it all while you were with Vanguard. It's company property. It belongs to me." A collective gasp went through their audience. Adeline didn't flinch. Instead, she looked down at his hand on her arm with a look of profound weariness, as if swatting away a persistent fly. "Remove your hand, Bennett," she commanded, her voice soft, but laced with steel. He let go as if her skin had burned him. "You really should have paid more attention to the details," she said, her gaze sweeping over the powerful witnesses around them. "Not just to our marriage, but to the law. Any work I did in my own time, in my own studio using my own resources, is my legally protected intellectual property. I filed the copyrights and patents under my maiden name 6 months ago. The very same day, in fact, that you breezed past my desk, glanced at my life's work, and dismissed it as a utopian fantasy that wasn't worth your time. Thank you for that, by the way. Your official disinterest will make a wonderful exhibit in any potential court case." Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing his rage and deflating it into pure, pathetic horror. He had been so comprehensively outmaneuvered that it defied comprehension. This wasn't a spontaneous act of revenge. It was a long-planned, meticulously executed checkmate. "This isn't over," he snarled the threat, sounding hollow even to his own ears. Adeline almost smiled, but it was a sad, fleeting expression. "Oh, Bennett," she said, the pity in her voice, a final, devastating blow that stripped him of his last shred of dignity. "It was over before it even began. You just didn't know it." She turned her back on him then, a final, definitive act of dismissal. She seamlessly resumed her conversation with Tristan Cole, leaving Bennett standing alone in the wake of her power, a pariah in the middle of a party that was once his. The fallout was immediate and brutal. The next morning, the headlines screamed his name. Vanguard in freefall. Architect's revenge. Ashford's gala of ruin. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls he didn't dare answer. An emergency board meeting was called via a curt email, his attendance not requested. By noon, a press release announced his termination as CEO, citing a crisis of confidence in his leadership. Weeks bled into a miserable month. His assets were frozen pending legal battles he knew he couldn't win. The cavernous house, once a symbol of his success, became his prison, its silence echoing with the ghost of his failures. He saw Katerina on a tabloid news show, weeping crocodile tears as she recounted how she had been manipulated and deceived by him. She was already rebranding, already finding her next host. Finally broken, and with no other options, he drove to the city's newest and most talked-about office building. The sleek glass and steel structure bore a discreet sign, Hale Whitaker Innovations. It was a building he could never have conceived of. It was too hopeful, too brilliant. He had to beg the receptionist to even announce his presence. After a long, humiliating wait, he was shown not to a grand office, but to a small, sterile conference room with glass walls that looked out onto a vibrant, collaborative workspace. The energy of the place, the quiet hum of creativity and ambition, was a stark contrast to the suffocating fear that had defined his last days at Vanguard. When Adeline entered, the breath caught in his throat. She wasn't wearing a gala gown, but a simple, impeccably tailored pantsuit. She looked energized, focused, and more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Success was her native element. He had only been a tourist. "What do you want, Bennett?" she asked. There was no emotion in her voice, only the flat, efficient tone of someone with a busy schedule. I'm sorry, Addie. he began the old nickname, feeling like a shard of glass in his mouth. I was a fool, a monster. I see that now. I took you for granted. I destroyed everything that mattered. Yes, you did. She agreed, her gaze unwavering. He swallowed his pride, the act itself, a painful lump in his throat. I have nothing left. The lawyers have taken everything. I came to ask, to beg, if there's a place for me here. A consultant, an assistant, anything. I know the business. Adeline leaned forward, her hands clasped on the table. A flicker of something not pity, but a kind of academic curiosity passed through her eyes. You know, for years I believed my greatest and most complex project was the Vanguard Tower. But I was wrong, she said, her voice soft, contemplative. My biggest project was you. I spent 10 years propping you up, polishing your image, feeding you ideas, and pretending they were yours so your fragile ego wouldn't break. I designed your entire public persona, Bennett. I built you from the ground up. And my only regret is that the materials I had to work with were so fundamentally flawed. She stood, then her movement signaling the absolute end of their interaction. She walked to the glass door, pausing with her hand on the handle. The difference between you and one of my buildings, she said, turning to look at him one last time, is that a building with a faulty foundation can sometimes be saved with reinforcement and careful retrofitting. But you're a tear-down. There's nothing left to salvage. She opened the door and walked out into the bright, bustling office, back to the future she was building. She didn't look back. Bennett was left alone. In the glass box, the silence of the room, a roaring testament to his own emptiness. He could see her outside, laughing with her colleagues, a blueprint for a better world spread out before her. He was just a ghost, a ruin. She had left behind a man who had not only lost the spotlight, but had finally understood he'd never truly been in it at all. Adeline Hale's story isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that our greatest strength is often the very thing others underestimate. She turned the deepest betrayal into her defining moment, not by stooping to her husband's level, but by rising so far above it that he could no longer even cast a shadow on her. Her journey from the quiet architect behind the scenes to the visionary leader in the spotlight reminds us that our worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. It is forged in our own talent, resilience, and the courage to finally build our own future. If Adeline's journey from the shadows to the spotlight resonated with you, show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with anyone who needs a reminder of their own power. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of incredible karma and empowerment. Thank you for watching.